Welcome to Adventure Unfiltered with your host, Lorna Bray. So, in this week's episode, I speak with Cameron McNeish. And on the surface, Cameron's story is extraordinary. Mountaineer, writer, broadcaster, storyteller, a lifelong champion of the hills and wild places. But as we talked, it became really clear that Cameron's legacy is not defined by summits or achievements. It's defined by something deeper. His ability to translate landscape into story and story into meaning. Through books, television, and decades of walking and climbing, Cameron has helped generations of people see the hills differently, not simply as terrain, but as companions in life. More than anything, Cameron is a storyteller. He spoke about the power of story and song, how they carry landscape, memory, and meaning across generations, how they allow us to hold on to places even as time moves forward, and how storytelling itself is a form of belonging, a way of keeping something alive. Through his writing and voice, Cameron has helped many of us understand that the hills are not just climbed, they are experienced, remembered, and shared. And in that sharing, something lasting is created. One of the most human moments in our conversation came when Cameron spoke about ageing and the almost grief that accompanies the realisation that he can no longer move in the hills as he once did. But what stood out was not loss, it was gratitude. The hills still bring joy, they still feel like home, they still hold meaning. Adventure, he reminded me, is not only about what we can do physically, it's about the landscape and what it gives us across a lifetime. So let's go. This is Cameron McNeish with There's Always the Hills and Always a Story.
I always think once you go past Aviemore, you're leaving the Highlands.
Isn't
I've got a
that
sister
funny?
who lives in Carbridge.
What's above Aviemore then? If you're leaving the Highlands, what do you call above Aviemore?
Well, the other side of Aviemore is it's not. It
that
doesn't.
the north?
To me, Nethybridge and Carbridge, and it doesn't feel like the Highlands. And Granton's like that. I don't. I never see Granton as the Highlands.
Maybe you could settle a debate then, because on season 1, my good friend Iona was my very first guest. We recorded it after a sea swim up on the Murray Coast. We were talking about whether the Murray Coast and Inverness is the east coast, because I always saw that as the north of Scotland.
Yes, yeah.
But then when you look at the map and you look at where it is, it's the east. So is it the northeast or is it the east coast?
Well, I would say Murray was the northeast. I would say it was part of the northeast.
See
Inverness is the Highlands.
See, but Inverness is on the water.
I know.
And it's when you see it, because it comes in a wee bit, but I think it's still in the east.
I know what you mean.
But
Yeah,
you
it is.
you
Yes.
say
I mean,
Inverness
even
is
here,
north.
we're kind of Eastern Highlands.
Yeah.
You know, we're certainly Highlands, but we're certainly Eastern Highlands.
Do you know what I love about living here? We never get really at midges.
No, I know.
Do
It's
they?
not nearly as bad as
Bizarre.
through I know. It's great.
Why is that, do you think?
I think it's ideal here. I like it here particularly because we've got this lovely blend of mountains and lochs and trees. I just think it's the most beautiful blend. Whereas, you know, you go on the West Coast and it can be a bit
Wild.
dour and wild. And I like that. I get so annoyed at people nowadays who say, but that's not a natural landscape. There's no trees on it. It's denuded and blah, blah. And I say, well, I like it. I grew up with that and I love the bareness. I love the wildness of it. So,
It's moody.
I don't go along
You
with
always
that.
like whenever you
Very much
pass
so.
through, I can't think of a time that I've passed through Glencoe and the sun's been shining.
Aye.
I think it's always been moody
Aye.
looking.
Yeah,
with
a
the
lot
weather
of people
coming
see
in.
that. You see, I'm the kind of opposite because I've spent so much time in Glencoe climbing and hill walking, and to me it's a glorious place. I love it, but I can understand why people, you know, the tourist board for a while referred to it as the Glen o' Weeping, you know. Because of the massacre,
because of the
you
massacres,
know, one event in history, and
that's
that's it, damned forever.
I think
you know.
because the mountains are so imposing. I remember the very first time I did my first Munros up in Glencoe, and I was introduced to the Clachay Inn because I hadn't heard of it before then. Don't know how I hadn't heard of the Clachay Inn. It's like, you know, it's like a place in history in Scotland now. But we went in and I remember coming out the Clachay and I looked up and I was like, oh, the weather's closed in. As in it's so dark, and then I realised I was actually looking at a mountain because it was so high. that I was like, oh, actually, the skies are way,
Yeah,
way up
that's
there.
Glencoe's like that.
Yeah.
You really have to look up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's such a great place.
It's beautiful.
There's so many places like that. We're so lucky.
Cameron, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
You grew up walking in the Campsie Fells and climbed Ben Lomond as your first Munro. What do those early days in the hills mean to you now?
Probably everything. I look back on those days with immense fondness. It was a time of discovery. It was a time of exploration. It was a time of just finding new things and finding out a lot about myself, which was really interesting. I was quite fortunate that from my mathematics class window at school, I could look out across the city of Glasgow and see the outline of the Campsies, and that was the dominant feature. And I used to sit there for ages when she'd been doing algebra and geometry and all the rest, just wondering what's beyond that dim outline, what's over that horizon. And eventually I went off with some pals, and we climbed, we walked in the Campsies, we went to the highest point, Earl's Seat, in the Campsies. And from there we could gaze north, and it was a whole new vista. I could see what was over that horizon. It was basically the Highland line, that old geological fault that stretches from the south end of Loch Lomond right up to Stonehaven, beyond which lies the Highlands. And dominant amongst all these hills was Ben Lomond. And we said to each other, yeah, one day if we're good enough, we'll go and climb Ben Lomond. And it was a sensible way of doing it, because we kind of progressed as we learned more. I mean, we went to the Campsies and knew nothing. We didn't have waterproofs. We had read somewhere that tramps use newspapers to lie on to stop the cold coming through. So all of our wee trips to the Campsies, we'd go and buy a Glasgow Herald, because it was a big newspaper, and we would lie on it. And we cooked over open fires and burnt our fingers, and we get wet and we get cold and we get lost and we fell off things. But it was all adventure. It was all learning. It was all this part of progression. And eventually we did get up to Ben Lomond, and we climbed it. And from there we gazed north again and saw all this jumble of hills, the Crianlarich Hills, the Arachar Alps, and thought, if we're good enough one day, so there's a kind of gradual progression. So those years were very, very important to me. It wasn't a formal outdoor education. It was just learning by experience, which I think is probably the best way.
What did it feel like when you got to the top of Ben Lomond? You know, because I mean, it's not a tiny hill. It's quite a walk to get up there. And obviously from the Campsies, that's kind of the next level up. When you got to the top, did it awaken anything in you, or was it just pure excitement when you got to the top?
Well, there was excitement, but I think there was a real sense of awe. I'd been born and brought up in Glasgow. Wherever way you look, there are buildings. And you go up there and you don't see any buildings, you don't see any roads either. I mean, it's fantastic. You see from the Arachar Alps right round to the Crianlarich Hills, and it's just jumble of mountains. And, I'd read a lot about the Scottish hills and the Highlands, but I'd never kind of experienced it like that from a height looking down on it. And it's just the sheer size of it all was quite overwhelming, actually. But it's fantastic. Funnily enough, we didn't regard it as a Munro because we didn't know what Munros were. We had no idea what Munros were at that point. It was just, Ben Lomond was Glasgow's mountain. We referred to it as the Ben. Nowadays we refer to Ben Nevis as the Ben.
The Ben, that's it.
But for a Glaswegian, the Ben is Ben Lomond. So this was Glasgow's mountain. So it was as a Glaswegian, it was good to get up there and climb it.
What did you wear at that time? Because obviously, if you're going up the Campsies with a newspaper and cooking on open fire, did you get a bit more prepared for going up Ben Lomond?
I think by that time I had bought a cagoule.
Oh, amazing!
It was a kind of knee-length polyurethane cagoule, and if you wore it for more than 5 minutes all fastened up, you get soaked with condensation inside it. And it was red. I remember it was red. I was really excited because it was red and it had a hood, so we could put the hood up. And so that was the kind of sole bit of equipment that was proper equipment. We had old boots. We had old nowadays you'd call them workman's boots that we'd picked up in an Army Navy store. All our stuff was bought from Army Navy stores, except the cagoule. It was bought from a wee shop just off Maryhill Road in Glasgow, owned by a guy called Sam Brown. He had this tiny wee outdoor shop, and he had these cagoules made up by somebody, I don't know, Vango or somewhere, and he sold these cagoules. So that was it, and we had an old, nowadays you'd call it a Bergen, a really old-fashioned rucksack that we picked up somewhere. And we didn't have vacuum flasks or anything like that. We had a couple of sandwiches that we'd taken from home. So our equipment was very, very, I was going to say rudimentary. It wasn't even that. It just didn't exist. I mean, we didn't have maps, we didn't have compasses. And even if we didn't know how to use them. We just followed our noses. And inevitably tried to take the steepest part of the route, because that felt like mountaineering. Following a path didn't feel like mountaineering. So we'd inevitably got these steep bits and fall off and get into all sorts of nonsense. But it was fun and it was adventure. And it really was adventure, because I've always defined adventure by something that's a journey where the outcome is not necessarily known. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And certainly those journeys were like that. With no idea if we're going to get up there or not. But it was good, and it was a learning process.
I absolutely love that. And were you instantly, like you say, looked over at the Arrochar Alps and you saw all the other tops, and were you instantly thinking, we need to do those ones next?
Yeah, I think so. Something gets into your blood. There's something, from day one, I had something in my heart somewhere that attracted me to mountains. I remember as a very youngster, we had a little holiday caravan in Saltcoats on the Ayrshire coast. And when I say holiday caravan, it sounds kind of posh, but it wasn't. It was 16 foot long, and you made the beds up from the cushions and the seats, and it had coloured gas lights, and it even had a wee fire in it. So my dad used to go in this bus on a Friday night. My dad would take a wee bag of coal that would light this wee fire, and there were 4 of us and a dog in this tiny little caravan. But it was great, and we used to walk along the esplanade in Saltcoats and gaze across the Firth of Clyde to the outline of the Isle of Arran. And I remember my dad patiently pointing out the shape of the sleeping warrior, the shape of the hills on Arran. I now know it was Goat Fell was the main hill. But on clear days you could look across there, and the clarity was fantastic, and you could see the streams coming down the hillside and the different shades of the heather and the grass. And I remember that I was completely mesmerised by views like that. And I don't know where that came from, because my parents didn't climb mountains. I don't think they'd even seen a proper mountain in their lives. But funnily enough, I had an old auntie who lived till she was just 100. She died when she was 100. And I remember visiting her when she was 99, and she said, I watched you on TV last night. I always wished that I could have had more time to go and climb mountains like you've done. She says, there's always something in my heart that attracted me to mountains, and I wanted to go, but I just never had the opportunity to do it. So if there's a gene somewhere, it probably came from her rather than my parents. Yeah.
You are a published author of over 20 books. You have climbed every single named top in Scotland.
I'm not really a bagger in that sense. I mean, says the guy who's climbed the Munros 3 times.
I know, I was going to say.
I think we all say that. We're not really a bagger. But
you are by accident.
It is part of the psyche.
So how did imagination fuel your connection with the outdoors? Because obviously you are a published author, and I'm really keen to know, when did that spark happen? Were you always good with words, and then being in outdoors and being up the mountains kind of sparked that kind of creativity and those words for you? How did that all happen?
Yeah, maybe I should point out that during my teenage years, I wasn't all that interested in climbing mountains. I did occasionally, but I was an athlete. I was a long jumper. I was a Scottish international long jumper. I represented Scotland a couple of times when I was 18. So athletics that was what I lived for. I trained all the time, 6 days a week, from the age of 14 through into my early 20s. I was coached by a chap called John Anderson, who was the Scottish national coach at the time. And he eventually went on to fame as referee in the television show The Gladiators.
Oh, no way!
He was the wee guy who would say, 3, 2, 1, go. my old mate, Hamish Telford, we've been mates since we were 14. Hamish lives in Kingushi now, so we still do a lot of things together. Him and I went to have lunch with John 2-3 years ago. We met up with him in Glasgow, and it was wonderful to meet up with him after all these years. He was a great character. So athletics that was my number one thing. But I went to the hills occasionally, being aware that I had to be quite careful what I was doing because I was training hard for athletics and I didn't want to injure myself by falling down a mountain or something like that. So it wasn't really until I gave up athletics and the point came where I had to make that choice. But really that was about 1970 when the Commonwealth Games were in Edinburgh, and I'd hoped to make the Commonwealth Games team, but I had a number of injuries and various issues, and I didn't make it, and that kind of made me think I probably don't really have it to be a top-class athlete. What can I do with my life? And I was interested in hills, and I'd climbed a few hills, and I remember taking myself off to Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh after a training session in Edinburgh, and just sitting up there listening to the skylarks and looking across the Firth of Forth to the Lomond Hills of Fife, and that's where I made the decision to. I'm just going to go and climb more hills and see where that goes. And it was an important day. Athletics had meant so much to me, and to turn my back on it at that point was a big thing to do. I needed something that would fill that vacuum, and going to the hills did that. And it was probably around about that time that I found a book in Paisley Library called Mountaineering in Scotland, written by a chap called W.H. Murray, or Bill Murray, and I came to know Bill later on in life. Bill was one of Scotland's finest climbers in pre-war years. Bill was a very interesting character. He had been captured by Rommel's troops in the Second World War, somewhere in North Africa, and he was taken to a prisoner of war camp in Czechoslovakia. And to take his mind off the horrors of the prisoner of war camp, he started writing his memoirs of climbing in Scotland.
Wow.
And he'd almost completed the book, written, I should say, on toilet paper. He didn't have access to paper. And his mother used to send him Red Cross parcels. And in one of the Red Cross parcels was the complete works of William Shakespeare, which he swapped with somebody for a toilet roll.
So that he could write.
So he could write. And he wrote these memoirs on a toilet roll. But one of the guards found him hiding this manuscript in his tunic and took it and destroyed it. So after the war, he had to come home and start from scratch. So that really inspired me to go and climb and explore wild places in Scotland. But when I started writing myself, I didn't consider myself a writer at all. It was a way of earning a living from the mountains. And I did a lot of instructing, and it got to the point where I was a bit fed up running the youth hostel, and I had to try and make a go of it. So I was instructing and writing. And there was a lovely old man who lived here in Kincraig called Jock Lamb. And I had a wee kind of, a wee bit built onto the end of the house. That was my office. So Jock used to pass and give me a wave. And he took me aside one day and he said, "Look, I see you in there early in the morning, and I see you in there until fairly late at night working. You've got 2 young boys, and I don't want to sound like a interfering old busybody, but you should really be spending a bit more time with your 2 young boys." And at first I was slightly annoyed.
Yeah.
And then when I thought about it, I thought, he's absolutely right. Yeah, so something has to give here. I've either got to write or instruct. I can't continue doing both. It's not sustainable. So I chose to write. Writing to me has been a way of earning money to feed my family.
Well, you've got over 20 books now,
Yeah,
so, I would definitely
but you've got to
call
do
you
that.
an experienced author.
You've got to write like mad to make a living from it. 45 years I've made a living as a writer, so it kind of worked.
You've got a very, very good way with words. And of course, in front of us here, we've got a couple of books that I just kind of pulled out from our collection in our library as well. But this one in particular on top, it's the Munros Almanac. And I think it's from the 1990s, I'm sure.
1991, I think I wrote that.
Yeah, 1991, that's correct. But the reason that this one is so special to me is because this is my dad's book. He gave me this book when I moved to Mid Calder and started going up the big mountains again, and he had ticked all of the Munros that I've done, that my mum's done, and that he's done, which is really good. So we've got our initials against each.
Great stuff.
And yeah, so I've had that. That's been in our home, in our family home
Yeah.
since, well, the early 90s, really. So
Yeah,
I would have been
nice.
about 10, 11 years old since we've had that.
Your
But-
dad must have been the person who bought a copy then.
Oh, is there very few people?
Actually, that
got
went. It sold very well. We felt at the time there was a need. There was a Scottish Mountaineering Club guidebook, which was a fabulous book. But we felt there was maybe a need for a wee book that you could keep in your rucksack. And,
Yeah, it's
and
great. It's a
just with the
brilliant
basic,
size.
just the
Absolutely.
the basics. So it did very well.
What's really interesting about this book as well, of course, is that you talk about the 277
Aye,
Munros.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
of course, there's now 282. Where did those other five
Well, it went up
come
to
from?
284 at one time.
Oh,
and then,
yeah, of course, then it came down
and then it came
again.
back down again.
Why,
Yeah.
why did it go up and down?
Because people go out there with all sorts of modern equipment and measure the heights of these mountains. And the
Yeah.
Ordnance Survey, of course, is always remeasuring the mountains. And it's not that the mountains really change size; it's just that the ways of measuring
They're
them changes.
measuring them
So it's
better.
probably more and more accurate.
Yeah.
But there is an argument that says the Munros should be the mountains that Sir Hugh Munro
Yes.
first listed,
Yes.
rather than change it about all the time.
The other book that we've got in front of us here is a book that I bought my husband for his Christmas last year, and it's Scotland End to End.
Oh yeah, it was for a television program. We wanted to do a television program, and my television director and I, we had enjoyed a trip to the Himalayas in the Langtang Valley, and while we were over there, we realised that there was a Himalayan trail which went the whole length of the Himalayas, and we felt if the Nepalese can do a trail that goes the whole length of the Himalayas, surely we can have something in Scotland that goes the whole length of Scotland. Now, we had all sorts of national trails and whatnot, and it was a fairly easy job just to link them all together. So that's what we did. We linked them together with some bits and pieces where we had to get the maps out and find routes that joined them up. But it's a fairly easy task. So we decided we'd do a television programme and we'd do this trail and call it the Scottish National Trail. It runs from Kirkyetum in the Scottish borders, which is maybe an odd place to start a long distance trail. But Kirkyetum is the northern terminus of the Pennine Way. So in theory, you can start walking in Edale in Derbyshire and walk right up the Pennine Way to Kirkyetum and then walk from there all the way to Cape Wrath. And people say, why didn't you finish at John O'Groats? And I always say, have you ever been to John O'Groats?
Yes.
It's not. Cape Wrath is much more dramatic. The very fact that we have such a diversity of landscape in Scotland, and that's what makes Scotland so fantastic as a hill walking destination. I mean, if you take, for example, the Torridon Mountains and the Cairngorms, they're so different, and yet they're only half a day's drive between them. If you take the Scottish borders and an area like Glencoe, again, totally different in atmosphere, totally different in geology, totally different in culture. So all these great areas are so different. And this walk links up so many of those areas into one long walk. And the end of it, basically from sort of Aviemore, Kingusie to Cape Wrath, most of the way you're on this thing called the Cape Wrath Trail, which is it's a kind of recognised trail, but it's not signposted in any way. And some of it's tough. Some of it's really tough, but absolutely glorious. Fabulous, fabulous wild landscapes. So yeah, it makes up, it's a really good walk.
This is probably going to be a very, very hard question because it was so diverse and the trail was so different in so many areas. But if you were to pick one area or one part of that trail that you really enjoyed and appreciated the most, what would it be?
Well, that's easy because it was an area that I didn't really know very well, and that was the area from Kirkyetum to Edinburgh. I had been to the borders. I had climbed the Corbetts and the Donalds in the borders, but I didn't really know a lot of the areas. And I realised this is an area that's so rich in Scottish history, so rich in Scottish mythology, and actually a beautiful area in itself. It might not have the majestic qualities of the Highlands, but the rolling hills of the borders can make you very passionate about the place. And the culture is different. You know, I was brought up a football man in Glasgow. that's not the culture in the Borders, it's rugby.
Rugby.
And rugby is almost like a religion down there, and there's something really nice about that. So I really enjoyed that section between Kirkyetum and Edinburgh, and I think I walked that in 3 days or something. But that was very special.
Did you meet any interesting characters along the way?
Funnily enough, I didn't meet all that many people. I learned a lot about that area, that the Scottish Borders area, from the singing of a man called Archie Fisher. My other great love in life is folk music, traditional music, and Archie was like the godfather of Scottish folk music, Scottish traditional music. And Archie had lived in the Borders for a long, long time. He wrote songs about the Borders, and they were wonderful. So I kind of wandered through the Borders with very much with Archie in mind. I'll always associate the Scottish Borders with the singing of Archie Fisher. And although I didn't actually meet him on the route, he was kind of there with me all the time.
He was with you all the time.
Yeah.
How did broadcasting and presenting come around then?
Well, funnily enough, that came around on a mountain called Mount Elbrus in Russia.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Yeah,
wow.
I'd gone there. I was leading a group of people. The idea was we were going to go there and we were going to walk around the mountain over about 10 days. We would kind of backpack around the mountain, and then we would finish the trip by climbing to the summit. And we found ourselves at a hotel at the foot of the mountain. Staying in the hotel was a little film crew with Chris Bonington, the great mountaineer Chris Bonington, and I knew Chris fairly well at that time. And we got chatting, and he was trying to do the 7 summits, the highest mountain in each of the 7 continents. So Elbrus, being the highest mountain in Europe, was on his radar. So he was there, and he had a wee film crew with him. And the director of the film crew was a chap called Richard Else. And after we had done our trips, we all climbed the mountain together, and we came down, and we were having a coffee in the morning, and Richard said to me, "Tell me, do you know very much about a man called W.H. Murray?" And I says, "Yes, I do. I've read all his books, and he totally inspired me to climb mountains. He's one of my great heroes." And we sat and we blathered for the morning about W.H. Murray and what his contribution was to Scottish culture and Scottish mountaineering. 3 weeks later, I was in my office in Glasgow, and I got a phone call, and it was Richard. And he said, "I've been trying to convince the BBC to do a programme about W.H. Murray." And he said, and the chat we had was very helpful. They said they're happy to do it, but they want to do it as part of a 6-part series on Scottish mountaineering, the history of Scottish mountaineering, the last century of Scottish mountaineering. And they've commissioned that. Would you be interested in presenting the programmes? So that was great. So that came about, and then we did a couple of 6-part series for BBC Two after that called Wilderness Walks, where I went off and had a long walk with somebody who was quite well known but had a passion for wild places. So that was great, and then we did various things after that. So over a 25-year period, I had a fairly interesting television career.
When you read your words, you feel and you understand what you're talking about and what you mean. How do you get that across when you present? I
think in my case, it's just sheer enthusiasm and passion. It's quite often you have to memorize a script. I always found that quite tricky.
I am terrible at that.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's really not easy. But it's different. But if you're enthusiastic and passionate and can blether, if you've got a gift of the gab and can blether, then it works fine on television. We made a programme and we called it Sky Trail, and we wanted to kind of produce a walking route that took in the 2 finest landscapes on the Isle of Skye, the Trotternish Ridge in the north and the Coolin. And we walked from a place called Ruahunish, at the north of the Trotternish Ridge, and we walked down to Broadford, and we took in these landscapes, and that was brilliant. But I remember the night, our first night's camping at Ruahunish, and we put our tents up, and we went for a wee wander, and I was with these hard-nosed, hard-bitten mountaineers come camera operators who'd seen everything. And somebody says, "What's that in the water?" And it turned out to be a minke whale. And we sat for about half an hour watching this. There might have been one, there might have been several, I don't know. We only saw one at a time, but there could have been several. And it felt really close. It felt within a couple of 100 metres. We saw this thing coming out of the water, and it was fascinating. And what struck me, that here I was with these hard-nosed, hard-bitten characters who had seen everything, and yet they were like kids.
Yeah.
All the way back, they're saying, come on, that was fantastic, that was brilliant. See, and that's what nature in the raw does to you.
It does.
It makes you so, it turns you into a child again. It makes you so enthusiastic and so passionate.
Do you still feel the same passion now and excitement as what you felt that first time that you climbed Ben Lomond?
To a certain extent, it's changed a lot now, because there's an element of, how can I put this? There's an element of grieving in the process now. Grieving for the days when I could go and, spend 50, do 15 or 20 miles over the mountains and run over the mountains and feel fit and strong in the mountains. I'm not. I'm 76 now. I can't do it like I used to. So there's an element of grieving. There was a point a number of years ago when I didn't think I could go on a hill again, with various problems with my feet, and I really went through a grieving process. It was like like someone had died, and it was part of me that I felt I had lost forever. So nowadays I go to the mountains, and what counterbalances that grieving process is the memories of what I have done in the past and what I could do. But I still take a great amount of pleasure of being in amongst mountains. Somebody once said to me, what it is about the mountains that you enjoy so much? And it's very simple. Mountains make me happy. If I'm in amongst mountains, I feel happy. I feel at home. I like it. It's that simple.
Yeah.
I could probably talk in raptures about various mountains and what they do to me, but essentially mountains make me happy.
You've travelled quite widely, obviously Nepal, India, Canada and beyond. I was going to ask you a question about a journey that's maybe changed you the most, but actually, on reflection, looking at those wider international journeys, what is it about Scotland that brings you home? What is it about this place that you love the most when you reflect on those international journees and those adventures abroad?
Yeah, I've been to some beautiful countries in the world. I'm very passionate about a number of countries, particularly in Nepal. I'm patron of a charity that raises money for a particular village in Nepal. So I'm still sort of fairly involved with Nepalese people. Other countries I've really enjoyed: the USA, fabulous areas in the USA. I've been to Yosemite Valley 5 or 6 times. My wife and I have walked the John Muir Trail twice. Probably the finest trail we've ever walked in our life, through the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, which is just stunning. But coming home to Scotland, one, probably I'm a Scot, and I'm fairly proud of what we have in Scotland. We go away so often. My wife and I go away now for a month in the spring and a month in the autumn in our camper van. We go to France or Germany or Spain or whatever. And when we come home, we always say the same thing. Why do we go away? Why do you go anywhere? Look at what we have here. You come into Badenoch and it's, you've got this fabulous blend of mountains and lochs and the River Spey and forests and woodland. It's wonderful. And we always have the same answer. It's the weather. But by the same token, I suspect Scotland would be like a Disneyland, and it would suffer badly from over-tourism. So I've always been a great defender of the midgie, of the Highland midgie. People say the midgie's terrible, Scotland's great, but for the midgies. And I said, no, the midgies keep man's activity at bay. And we have history, yes, and we have culture. Yes. And I love the mythology of our mountaineers. I love the stories of Finn McCool and the Fianna warriors. I love all this stuff. And it's wonderful when you can go to a place like Glencoe and look up and see Ossian's Cave and think, what's the story behind Ossian's Cave? And it turns out that this is apparently where Ossian, the son of Finn McCool, the Bardic warrior son of Finn McCool, was born, and his mother was half red deer and half human. And you dig out these old stories, and Scotland is so full of it. It's fantastic. And the borders, it's very different. It's a very different kind of. It's not a Celtic Gaelic based mythology. It's a very different, very much a borders mythology. Stories of Merlin and Thomas the Rhymer and all this stuff. I just love all that stuff. And so much of it fits in with the landscape today, fits in with our place names and everything else, and it makes it all really, really interesting.
Cameron, this has been an absolute pleasure to have you on Adventure Unfiltered. I could sit here for hours and listen to you talk about Scotland and about the mountains. I always feel like when you talk to somebody that is so passionate about the mountains and so passionate about Scotland, you just want to go and climb every single mountain. You just, you look at the weather, you think, it doesn't matter that it's raining, let's go. It has been absolutely wonderful. But before we finish, I ask every guest about the strapline of the podcast, which is "In the wild, we remember who we are." And I wanted to know what those words mean for you.
That's really quite simple, as far as I'm concerned. I think we have to remember who we are and what is our relationship to these places we've been talking about. And I think so often, particularly in the 21st century, we see mankind as something separate from the natural world, whereas in actual fact, we're part and parcel of this great web of creation that's out there. I wrote a song fairly recently, and it's basically a song about climate change. And the song finishes off by, and I'll paraphrase the words, I can't quite remember what I wrote, but it's more or less, we're not fighting climate change to save the planet, because the planet is capable of looking after itself. We're fighting to save us, mankind, because if we continue in the way we're going, the planet won't be able to, it won't have the resources that we can survive. The planet will continue, it'll just change and adapt, but we won't be able to survive. So I think that makes us realise that we're actually very much part and parcel of the landscape. I'm reminded of the words of an American conservationist and forester by the name of Aldo Leopold. And this is what he said, and I think these words are so important. He said, "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we also belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." So I think we have to consider these landscapes as a community to which we belong. And by that token, the rocks, the mountains, the trees, the birds, the flowers, the plants are our brothers and sisters. John Muir was very good at talking about the plants, the flowers as his brothers and sisters. And that's the way we have to look. We're part of that community. And you can't just take us out of it or take another part. We're part and parcel of that whole thing. So I think when we talk about, who we are in relation to these landscapes, we're very much part of it. We're very much in there. And I think that helps in our connection with these landscapes. When we go for a long walk in the countryside or in a wilderness area, we can connect much easier if we consider ourselves as part of that landscape, rather than someone who's kind of parachuted in from elsewhere and we're only there for a short time. And it also helps our understanding and the importance of looking after these areas. And I think that's the most important thing. We really have to look after these areas as much as we can. We talk a lot about climate change being the great threat to the planet. I think an even greater threat is lack of biodiversity. And I think we're seeing a lot of that happening. So I think we have to look very, very carefully at that.
But I love that association and that community idea. I think that's wonderful. It's so important.
And you actually get a greater sense of it if you spend, like several days out there. You get a much greater sense of this connection. Sometimes it's hard in a day because you get so many other things going around your mind, and they're still there when you come home after 6 hours or so. But you go out there for several days and you kind of ease yourself into or back into that community.
Absolutely. We went away to Canada last summer on the Mississippi River, and we were literally in the middle of nowhere for 20 days. And it took me a good week to get into river life. And it was very simple, river life. You paddle down the rapids, You stop, you camp, you get up, you eat, it's like eat, paddle, sleep, repeat. That's what it was. And we were completely immersed in nature. And it took me a while to get back into normal life again. It's not that I didn't cope with it well. I found it really, really difficult because we were so used to river life and so used to being immersed in nature. Even just sitting down at a restaurant and looking around, it just didn't feel real. Everything felt almost fake. And I kind of thought, did that happen? Is that real? Did we just dream that? And all the little things that might have mattered before all of a sudden didn't matter anymore because it wasn't important to me at that time. And it took a little while. And it's a fantastic lesson. And a lot of that, of course, I've got back to normal life. But I'm sure there's a lot of what I learned from that trip I've taken forward with me into everyday life as well.
And that's the important thing. It's learning from these experiences. It's a wonderful thing that, wilderness travel is very, very simple, as you've just suggested. It is. It's eating and sleeping and waking up. It's so simple. And if we can learn the lessons of that back in our day-to-day life, then I think it's a huge bonus.
Cameron, I came to see you talk at Glasgow University. I think it was around about 2018 or 2019. One of the things that stuck with me the most and one of the things that I found really emotive was that at the end you said that you wanted to finish with a song.
The song that I normally sing when I'm giving talks is kind of what I would call my root song. I mentioned Archie Fisher earlier, and Archie actually wrote this song, and it's where I come from, basically. Archie called it the Shipyard Apprentice, and the first verse goes along the lines of, I was born in the shadow of a Fairfield crane, and the blast of a freighter's horn was the very first sound that reached my ear. In the morning I was born. I lay and I listened to the shipyard sound coming out from the unknown, and was lulled to sleep by a mother tongue that was to be my own. My father worked in the shipyards in Glasgow, and my grandfather worked in the shipyards in Glasgow. And if fate hadn't lent a hand, I would probably have ended up working there as well. But there's another song that is probably more reflective of where I am now, 76 years of age, not getting to the hills as often as I used to. And it's kind of looking, I suppose it's looking to the future when when I can't go to the hills at all when I'm gone. And this is a song that was written by a wonderful man called Ewan MacColl. And Ewan was one of the father figures of the whole sort of folk music revival in the 50s and 60s. He was actually born and brought up in Salford, just outside Manchester, but his father was Scottish. And funnily enough, his name Ewan MacColl's proper name is Jimmy Miller, but he adopted the name Ewan MacColl, and he wrote some wonderful songs over the years, and some became internationally known. But this is one that I like very much, and I think this is a song that kind of sums up so much for me at the age I am now. Farewell, you northern hills, you mountains, all goodbye. Moorlands and stony ridges, crags and peaks, goodbye. Glitterfach, farewell, Coolbeck, Scoffell, cloud-bearing Sullivan, sun-warmed rocks and the cold of Bleaklow's frozen sea, the snow and the wind and the rain of hills and mountains, days in the sun and the tempered wind and the air like wine, and you drink till you're drunk on the joy of living. Take me to some high place of heather, rock and ling, scatter my dust and ashes, feed me to the wind, so that I may be part of all you see, the air you are breathing. I'll be part of the curlew's cry and the soaring hawk, the blue milkwort and the sundew hung with diamonds. I'll be riding the gentle breeze as it blows through your hair, reminding you how we shared in the joy of living.
What a way to finish this conversation with Cameron McNeish. Cameron's voice has carried the hills to many of us for decades, and through story, song, and landscape, he reminds us that there's always something waiting, another path, another horizon, another story still to be told. For Cameron, the hills were never just destinations, they were home, a place of belonging, of memory, and a place where life, story, and landscape meet. And in those wild places, something simple and enduring remains. There's always the hills, and there's always a story. So thank you, Cameron, for being my final guest on season 2 of Adventure Unfiltered. And if you're not quite ready for season 2 to be over yet, then don't worry, because next episode I'll be back with a reflection episode just like season 1. So this episode will be talking about all the guests that I've had on season 2, recapping and reflecting on their stories and my favourite parts of our conversations. Developing the Adventure Unfiltered podcast and community has brought me so much joy, so thank you to everybody that has listened, contributed, shared, commented so far. I always say it, but this is just the beginning, and I am so excited to see where this podcast goes. So until next time, breathe deeply, keep adventuring, and don't forget, in the wild, we remember who we are.